Hey everyone, welcome back to the Meme Team podcast, where we break down viral pop culture moments in movies, TV, music, and politics. This week we're talking about Steven Spielberg showing up on his first podcast, how a bunch of YouTubers have made it into Hollywood, and the Ferrari Luce, is it Luce or Luce? Joni Ive's first car. My guest this week is Visa Veerasamy, writer, marketing consultant, and author of Friendly Ambitious Nerd. Welcome, Visa.
Thanks, Sonia. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So let's just jump into topic number one. I love listening to podcasts, and I've gotten super into movie podcasts. And one of the companies that I've been keeping an eye out for is The Ringer, because I love all their podcasts. But one of the ones that I've started watching recently is The Rewatchables. The premise is that it's movies that you want to watch over and over again. But after they started working with Netflix, is that it's movies that are on Netflix. They're all video podcasts listed on Netflix, and you get to watch them. So that's been an experiment that they've been running for the past, I think it's been 3 months now. It's gotten bigger and bigger productions as, it's gotten more popularity. But I think what they're doing more importantly and more interestingly is going after bigger stars to be on the podcast as guests. And so we're, finding that a bunch of celebrities and celebrity directors who have never been on podcasts before are going onto these podcasts. Leonardo DiCaprio went onto The Big Picture, which was super interesting. But I think what I found most interesting was how he would talk about being in the movie industry, what it was like for him, how he gets involved with the directors, his special relationship with Martin Scorsese. And that's just what happened with Steven Spielberg as well, where he was on The Big Picture. They did an episode at South by Southwest. And then he joined Bill Simmons and Sean Fennessy on The Rewatchables for the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. And you just kind of, have him kind of nerding out with these two guys who really love movies. And I think it was the first time that I've, listened to Steven Spielberg just dive deep about not just, his movies, talking about E.T. and, Close Encounters and just, all the movies he's made. But then, it comes to light that he had a really interesting relationship with Stanley Kubrick, who he admired, but he also kind of developed a friendship. So he just gave us really cool insights into 2001: Space Odyssey that we'd never really heard before. And I think that brings me around to how podcasts as a medium are changing the type of content that is available to people that really like nerding out about specific topics. There's just so much more possible when you dive deep into topics with people that really know what they're talking about. So, Visa, I would love your thoughts about podcasts as a medium, the future, where we've been, where we're going.
Yeah. So, I think how I would contextualize the whole thing is that really we have been living through a grand media reformation, since smartphones, streaming, just YouTube, things being able to be recorded. Recording is basically effortless and cheap and free. Uploading is basically effortless and free. And so a bunch of the assumptions that people had about media production of all kinds no longer apply. But the interesting thing is that, and you can look at the history of all media technologies here, that when the constraints drop, it still takes time for cultural attitudes to shift accordingly. Theoretically, Steven Spielberg could have done a podcast a decade ago, right? Or 15 years ago. But it had to take this long because you needed audiences to adapt. You needed the prestige and attention and gatekeepers to catch on. Print magazine in the newsstand, documentaries and interviews and stuff. There were all these assumptions about what will people want to watch and what will people want to hear, and it had to appeal to everyone. And I'm now reminded of the large frozen pies. The most popular flavor was apple pie because you would buy it.
Right.
It's not necessarily anybody's favorite flavor, but it's the one that there's the least fights over. Everyone's kind of okay with apple pie. But then when you have more flavors and they come in smaller sizes and everyone can have their own pies, there's an explosion in blueberry and all these other flavors. And so it turns out that it's not that people loved apple pie individually, but that
Mm-hmm.
it was okay. And then now it
Yeah.
turns out that you can have really weird flavors potentially. And again, you can see it. There's probably incentive for, if you are starting a frozen pie company today, you might want to do outlandishly weird flavors that someone on
Yeah.
Instagram or TikTok might want to try and comment on, and you get attention that way. So like the incentives have changed. And
Mm-hmm.
similarly, like, yeah, it makes perfect sense that Spielberg and any prominent player in media would be pivoting to going on podcasts, because again, they get to speak at much more length, so they get to go into much more detail about whatever it is that interests them. Now, my YouTube thing I like to do is I like to go look up like video game documentaries, and they can really get into the details of, like, I remember watching a like almost 10-20 minutes of when they made Oblivion, Elder Scrolls game, and it's just there's this long section of the guy who did like the trees and the leaves, and how he would go to the actual forest to take photographs of all the
Mm-hmm.
colors. And he's like, oh, video game foliage used to look bad because people thought it's all the same green, but if you actually
Mm-hmm.
examine nature, there's many different shades. And like, he's going into this for minutes and minutes and minutes, and as I
Yeah.
was watching this, I'm like, huh, this is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And there's no way I would have seen this on television years ago.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that would have been cut, because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
we need to cover the main things. And it
Yeah.
turns
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
people are interested in all the details. It then selects, like, think about how there were people who were charismatic and popular in the silent film era,
Mm-hmm.
who once talking became a part of movies, the people who could speak well now could like outcompete the people who were charismatic in silence. And
Yeah.
similarly, I wonder if we are now going to see increasingly all media selecting for people who speak well on podcasts, people who can speak at length. Like, there may have been actors who were really good at acting, but don't really have much to say about their process or about anything
Mm-hmm.
else, and they are now going to be, rightly or wrongly, right? It's just the nature of the constraints that we're in. They are not going to be as beloved as the authors who can speak beautifully about their process and their
Yeah.
colleagues and everything. So that's just really interesting to me.
Yeah. 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 I think two things kind of stand out about why I think this is happening. One being that celebrities themselves want to control more of their narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you saw this recently, but this interview came out about Miles Teller. It
Yeah.
came across as him being like an asshole, right? And then so
Right.
they're calling him out, and he's like, you know what? I'm never doing these types of
Yeah.
interviews again for magazines, because they get to take, whatever it is that I said and just like put a spin on it, right? One of the huge reasons why they like going on podcasts is because, like, generally most podcasts, you're not cutting and editing much out. It's just like a conversation that's going. So people are listening to like a full conversation without the
Right.
context of like the journalist, putting their spin on it of like, oh, he was doing this and, this was happening.
Yeah.
So I see the allure of
Mm-hmm.
wanting to go on these, podcasts. The other thing too is how many like the rise in celebrity podcasts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
With Leonardo DiCaprio, like we mentioned, he went on The Big Picture, but the other one that he went on was The Heights with Jason and Travis Kelsey. And like, the main premise there is always going to be like, they're not going to throw gotcha questions at you, right? Like, they're not really trying to offend you. They're not going to bring up about how you only date 25-year-olds and you don't like do very many interviews. Like, it's mostly like, we want to talk about, fun stuff and like easygoing stuff for like you. And at first I was like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. Like, they would want to do that. But when I actually listened to the interviews, I'm like, when's the last time that I actually heard Leonardo DiCaprio talk about his process and like how he thinks about how he's gonna act in a scene, and like how he like thinks about his relationship with directors and his coworkers, right? Like, um, it ended up giving me more insights into him and his process and like movies and movie making that like you wouldn't get from like journalists. And it's funny because that's all kind of falling out of favor, is because they do seem to want to like be a little antagonistic to the
Yeah.
stars, by asking them political questions or asking them like, questions that like, make them uncomfortable. And I see that also being a thing that's happening in like tech, right? Where it's like you have journalists that are, one can say antagonistic to like, the tech people. And you also see them kind of turning away. And then we're seeing the rise in tech podcasts and interviews, where it's like you can just go and have those like, friendly questions that are going to get asked. To like talk about, the process. So I do wonder how that's gonna like, change things going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the incentives for like the journalism industry has been for a long time been like adversarial. Like, and it could even be that the journalist tries to write something thoughtful or have a thoughtful conversation, and then like their editor or whoever else cherry picks some
Yeah.
line from the interview to look bad. I remember there was one. I think it's an interview with Adam Levine, the Maroon 5 singer. It was a good interview, and like somewhere in there, he was asked about like the difference between bands when he was starting out versus bands now, and he was
Mhm.
saying he was making like a nuanced point about like discoverability and people, and then the quote that was used like in the tweets was like him saying that there are no bands anymore, which is
No,
obviously untrue, and like it's obviously in context of a longer sentence because no one would
yeah.
say that by itself. But
Yeah.
and the people who see the tweet and quote the tweet and insult him for the tweet, they don't care what he's actually said. But it became discourse for the day, and people were mocking him about it. And I was like,
Mhm.
wow, if I was that person and I said something in a conversation,
Yeah.
and people were just like insulting me for a thing that I didn't actually say, like in context, like I would get so. I mean, you would get really angry, or you would feel unsafe, or you would
Mhm,
be
mhm.
less trusting, and you would kind of end
Yeah.
up like closed off in your own little bubble of people who you think get it, and that has its own
Mhm,
challenges and
mhm, mhm.
costs, and you kind of understand why celebrities so easily go insane. Like it's just not.
Yeah.
People are not made to live like that. But yeah, I also hear what you're saying is that like podcasts do give people more space to share like the wider context of everything that they're doing. Like again, like if
Mhm,
if it's never been a better time to be interested in process because people share
mhm.
so much detail about process. It's just like there's more process information now than you could probably get to, where previously we used to be starving and now we're drowning in so much of it. And yet, yeah, you also point out that like people go on podcasts to try and sell the narrative that they want to sell, which may or not necessarily, have any bearing on the truth of what they're doing. You go on the podcast where you know you will not be challenged, and you know that, and so you can just have like hours long, like PR friendly chats, which it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like you do get
Yeah,
to
yeah,
learn,
yeah.
you do get to inhabit it, and you do get to learn things. And we're always telling on ourselves whether we realize it or not. So to the like, serious listener who wants to get stuff out of what they're listening to, I think it's better now than ever before. But it doesn't magically erase like human nature problems where like if someone is trying to bullshit people, they're still gonna do that. I
Yeah.
I like where things are going. I do feel that things are more democratic. I think people have in fact already forgotten what it was like before. Like when I saw something very interesting recently about where someone was saying it was a Trevor Noah podcast snippet. He was explaining that um in the past, you would, if you want to be successful as a musician, you have to go to
Oh,
your
yes, 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 I
label,
saw
and
that.
your label will go to the radio station, and they will tell the radio station, oh, you should play this guy a lot, and we will back you, and we will pay you or whatever, and
Mhm, mhm.
that's how it works. And then he says now what they do is they have these services online where you basically pay people for get driving views to your song. So if they don't get you any views, you don't have to pay them. And so Trevor Noah was describing this as though in the past it was okay and now
I know.
it's fake. But I'm
Yeah.
like, it's performance marketing. You're paying for results, and
Yeah.
you're not gonna be able to like just throw money at something and make it viral. Like, and the guest that he was talking to was saying, oh, these people got this idea from politics, and they're
Politics,
talking
yeah.
like, and like, yeah, it's true. We were there when Obama was like the first
Mhm,
online campaign. But even so, you look at, let's say, like Bloomberg, I think for his campaign, he threw a ton of money at it, and like
Mhm.
didn't really get
I mean,
anywhere
we're
with it.
seeing it right now with, like, Spencer Pratt here in LA,
Yeah.
right? With,
Hmm.
like, all the
Right.
clipping that's coming from all the
Yeah.
podcasts he's doing, and then the
Right.
AI videos that he's doing, like,
Yeah.
it's definitely, a thing, and that's part of what the other part of, this where, with these podcasts, just the distribution of it,
Hmm.
right? It's like now it's like you
Right.
have the episode that lives on,
Hmm.
like, Netflix or YouTube or whatever, but
Hmm.
then the whole point is you're cutting it into, like,
Yeah.
snippets,
Yeah.
that, is what goes viral on
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
I feel like with when they appear, they're doing like the press junkets with
Hmm.
like, late night shows. I hardly ever see that now,
Right.
Um, which is funny because, what's his name? The Colbert, show was finally canceled. And it's like, oh,
Right.
one of the reasons was that, right? It's just like
Yeah.
that, falling viewership.
Right.
And then you're seeing this rise in like podcasts because it's like,
Right.
oh, you're able to have those like niche topics where like if you want to go promote your movie to like
Hmm.
movie fans,
Hmm.
you go to like the podcast that like,
Right.
is directly, speaking to those movie audiences,
Mm.
so it just
Right.
makes so much more sense to be using, podcasts to go out there and promote your work. So definitely expect that to start taking over, the late night shows or, magazines, because this is just so much, easier to target the audience
Right.
that you want to go after.
For listeners who don't know about the backstory, the Colbert backstory is very interesting because
Mhm.
the phrase "cancel culture" basically
Yeah.
got popularized when Stephen Colbert was doing an episode about like cultural insensitivity, and he had his Twitter account tweet. So he's performing a racist character on his TV show, and then his Twitter account would tweet what he was saying on the TV show, but the tweets don't have any context, so it looks like a racist tweet. Like,
Sure.
and then the backlash to the racist tweet was cancel Colbert, and then that went super
Uh,
viral, and it was like they were trying to get his show canceled, and the activist who was leading that charge, Sui Park, she got a lot of like death threats and all that stuff.
hmm.
She was basically driven off the internet. So it's like at the time I remember thinking, oh, it's kind of funny because Sui like helped to make cancel Colbert go viral, but she didn't get that successful. She kind of canceled herself in a way, and then ultimately where like you could say that she ultimately succeeded like a decade and a half later, but like the show got cancelled not for racism or controversy, just people just lost interest, and it's just they were spending too much money and they're not getting a return on the investment. It's like just boring economics outcome, and I feel like this is a pattern so much in the world
Yeah.
where people want things to be because of like grand narratives, and like grand narratives are interesting and relevant, but like when the underlying economics changes, that's usually when like things go out of business, and then it just like no fanfare, it just kind of quietly goes out, right? Like I remember,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think similarly
yeah.
Disney had a massive drop in their streaming something something, and everyone was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, is it because of woke, oh, is it because of the princesses? And it turns out like there was some technical deal with like Disney was for a while getting licensing for a huge amount of like Indian cricket streaming or something, and that's like hundreds of millions of people signed up for that, and then that fell
That's
off
so
for some
funny.
technical reason, but then the people who say, oh, it's because of woke, like they get to have their day in the sun because it looks like it, right? If you want to believe. So it's all very funny and chaotic and circus like, where again, if you really want to get to the bottom of things, you can go and look it up and figure it out. But like I guess for the average person who views everything as entertainment, like so even just trying to whatever news events, it's not going to affect you personally probably. So it's just entertainment, and you just believe what you want to believe and you say what you want to say. But it all
Yeah.
kind of shakes out in the end. So we'll see. It's funny.
That's funny. Okay, let's round that out with lessons. A huge lesson here is that
Right.
podcasts are here to
Yeah.
stay. If
Yeah.
a 78-year-old Hollywood legend like
Correct.
Steven Spielberg decides to
Right.
go onto a podcast to promote his movie,
Yeah.
instead of doing late night shows or magazines, then like
Right.
the format is here. So, what is it that you can do in terms of that? Like,
Yeah.
is it that you can start getting your founders or the like people that are like knowledgeable in your company to start going out to like podcasts? There's so many like niche podcasts these days. Like, can you start using them to promote your product, to promote your people, show them
Right.
off as like thought leaders? And
Yeah.
then, on the flip side, like, is there a way that like it might make sense for you and your company to start a podcast with
Hmm.
like a very niche or like narrow topic that like talks about the industry and that could be of interest to, your target audience or if you're doing like B2B, like
Right.
other companies that are in the same space so that like you become known as like the go-to place to have like these conversations. I think we're learning more and more that people really like to nerd out on the things that they're super passionate about.
Right.
Um, Obviously, for Steven Spielberg, it's about movies and
Yeah.
directing. But, within your industry, what are those topics that really get people, talking? And that could be like a way for you to create content out there. And then the last one is just, yeah, the clips are like the real distribution here, right? Where it's like just getting those like 30 to like 90-second clips are what's making this interview go viral. And I'm seeing it all over my timeline because people are
Yeah.
just interested in him geeking out about like, his relationship with Stanley Kubrick and, talking about ET and like how he directs celebrities. So it's just like really interesting conversations that, nobody else is really having out there. So what are those things that you can be doing for yourself?
Yeah, so even before podcasts were really taking off, and even before AI and all these things, like I remember very early on, like when came online as a kid, and I saw like the fact that you could publish by yourself online, like anything you want, you can just write whatever you want online. I was drawn to that like spiritually, like I just wanted to, because
Hmm.
I read books as a kid, and I wanted to contribute to that endeavor of reading and writing, but I didn't know any publishers or editors, or like where do I go to start writing a book or whatever. And then when I encountered the internet, I'm like, oh, you can just publish blog posts and tweets and whatever. And I was
Hmm.
just over. It was so obviously to me back then, the thing to do. And I was preaching to everyone I could, like, you should start a blog, you should tweet, you should vlog, you should do whatever.
Hmm.
And it's aged so beautifully because, like, for a long time I think I encountered a lot of people who were like, well, I don't know if this is good enough, or I don't know if people will be interested in this, or I'm scared of not, and there's a full spectrum of I don't know what to say versus I don't have anything to say, and like I have so much to say, but like I don't know how to edit it. And like you really almost don't need to edit things anymore. And like you can just ramble everything you have,
Yeah.
and like you can get AIs to read the transcript, or you can get other people. It's just everyone I know who was prolific before and was overwhelmed with I don't know how to get people to I don't know how to write a good introduction for my stuff, or I don't know how to get
Hmm.
people into my body of work. Like those problems are getting solved now. And so we are still in the early days. It's still a great time to start a new podcast, start a new blog, whatever. And the payoffs tend to take longer than people would like. People would like it if they could do 3 podcast episodes and then get traffic,
Yeah.
get users, get money, whatever. And it takes a while. It takes like at least
Yeah.
at least a year. And you have to be understanding that while it's easier than ever to make stuff, it's people are also overwhelmed. And so a lot of people use longevity as a filter. So like if someone says they're starting a podcast, and then like you might just ignore it for a year, right? And then when you see that they're still doing it a year later, 2 years later, you're like, okay, I guess they're serious.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll check it out now. And this isn't like a personal attack on anyone. Like everyone's just overwhelmed. Everyone has a stack of books they want to
There's
read,
so much to
movies they want to
do.
watch. There's just
Yeah.
infinite stuff of everything. But each individual's perspective is valuable. It just takes time for people to warm up to it. So yeah, I highly recommend everyone share whatever you're thinking, talk to people if you can, like just keep going, and like it all shakes out in the end.
Yeah, definitely. And as you're doing it, you're learning so much, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, I've been doing this for a little over a year now.
Right.
And it's, I've learned so much. I've become a better like speaker. I've learned how to like
Mm.
wrap my head around my ideas a little bit better. So just even if you're doing it for yourself to like
Yeah.
improve, your own skills and like, I talk to really cool people. That's been like one of like the greatest things about this is like
Mm.
most people that I, ask to come on, like they say yes. And it's like we
Yeah.
have like a really amazing conversations and I learned so much from, other people that like think about things differently. So it's like a really cool space.
Yeah,
So
and
agree with everything
you
you're
have
saying.
you have a conversation with someone once, and it can live forever, and you can share it with somebody else. Like so, like you might have a record a podcast with someone, and then forget about it, and then like 2 years later have a conversation with someone else, and then be like, wait, I could send you this thing, and you can
Yeah.
get into it, like you can listen to it on the drive home or whatever, and it gets into all the stuff that you would want to talk about and stuff like that. There's many
Yeah, yeah,
many different
definitely.
versions of things like that. It's just amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we can move on to your topic.
I never thought I would afford a Ferrari, and I still don't think that's on the cards for me to someday own a Ferrari. And at the same time, now I don't know if I had the money, would I even want to? It's
Uh-huh.
just, I don't know if I'm skipping a bunch of steps here, but like I remember my older brother had like a very good model Ferrari and a model. I think he also had a McLaren and a Lamborghini. And like I was a
Mm,
child, and I saw
yeah.
my brother have these things, and it's just aspirational. Nobody told me what I should feel about those cars. I just saw them on my
Mhm.
brother's in my brother's room, and I'm like, yeah, those are objectively cool looking, sexy machines that I admire. Again, didn't really materialize, but everyone who does end up getting it, they get it because they had that fantasy at some point in time, and then they just followed through on it. And so, I'm of the view that the Ferrari brand is a very specific thing, right? Just to recap what happened, right? So they produced an electric car with Joni Ive's input, and like it looks kind of like a Nissan Leaf. It doesn't look like what you would associate with a Ferrari
It looks like
from,
a Tesla.
yeah, and not a nice one. It's like
Yeah.
and again, it's like if you didn't know about a Ferrari, if it's just this is an electric car, you'd be like, oh, okay, it looks like a decent electric car. But when you say it's a Ferrari, it violates the assumptions that people have accumulated over several decades. And yeah, you can actually go and look back at like the very, very old Ferraris, and there were some like quirky, strange Ferraris back in like 50s or whatever. But like the brand has come to be associated with a particular, like the stallion, the very kind
Yeah,
of like
yeah, yeah. I mean,
sexy,
Ferraris are meant to
masculine,
be
red.
sexy red cars, right?
Yeah. And so, I'm willing to consider the premise. So like there's a snippet of a podcast, something going around with
Yeah.
one of the people who was involved in designing it, and they were saying we expect people to respond poorly to this at first. We expect them to say that's not a Ferrari, that's not whatever, but we need to go into the future with something different. There's a possibility that Ferrari will be reimagined going to the electric car age, but I think it's a brand violation or a dilution. And like maybe what they could have done is they could have done like a spin-off brand. And there are all these funny, like if you take like Axe body spray and like Dove soap, like they all have very different demographics, very different marketing, and they're all owned by like the same like parent company, right? Like I think Unilever owns both Dove and Axe. And like Axe used to have like these very teenage boy marketing of like girls running after the boy with the spraying himself. And then Dove had all these like very like female empowerment, like oh, you're beautiful, and like it's just very, you would not believe that they are both owned by the same parent. It's
Yeah,
like they
yeah,
seem completely different. And similarly, I wonder if Ferrari wanted to do some kind of like Apple car vibe thing, maybe they should
yeah.
have like something by Ferrari, like they have that bit of separation so
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't
Yeah,
hit
or just
the
like a co-brand, right? Like you have the Harley
yeah
Davidson Fords, right? Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing here is it was overwhelmingly like panned, right? Like most
right
people just were negative about it.
yeah
Let me just drop some facts here. So it's their first fully electric car designed inside and out by Joni Ive and Mark Newsom's studio Love From. It's selling for $640,000. It's 5 seats, 4,050 horsepower, and 330 miles of range. But the biggest thing that people are talking about is that there's no like touchscreen on the inside. And Joni Ive stated it was because a large touchscreen doesn't work in a car that's incontrovertible. I find it easy and lazy. Ferrari's stock dropped 8% in Milan and then 5.1% in New York the day it launched. Not only is it an EV, which is kind of like, you expect most sports cars to be like, gas,
yeah
and to go fast, but then it just didn't look as sleek and like, sexy as a Ferrari
yeah
usually does. Who is the target audience for this, right? Like, for me, it's like in my mind, the, target consumer of like who buys Ferraris are people that don't actually care about having electric cars, But it reminded me of the whole like situation that happened with Cadillac, right? Where it's like they
mm-hmm.
had that, brand change. They changed the car, made it more like round, made it very like androgynous, more like female heavy. And like we talked about that here, like one of the things that we thought that Cadillac could have done is like go back to its origins of like, how it used to be when it first came out. I have this idea that like, cars should kind of revert back to like their nostalgic, elements of like how cars used to be, and create like special versions of that instead of trying to create, all these like new cars that just like don't
Yeah.
actually appeal to people. And then like we found out afterwards that like the Cadillac car only sold about like,
Yeah.
200 units across the
Yeah.
United States. Like that's
Right.
insanely low.
Yeah. So
So
as
I'll be curious to
yeah.
see how many Ferraris they
I
sell.
think let's make a prediction. So I think the thing that you just said, like the cars should go back to their old thing,
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
that's going to happen next. So I think we are
Yeah.
now going through this awkward, embarrassing. This is like the new Coke era, the era, like where.
Sure.
But yeah, I would say the Ferrari
Yeah,
Luce
yeah, yeah.
is like Luce. It's like the new Coke where they're like, oh, we're gonna try something different,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
it's like no, like nobody wants different along these particular dimensions
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
to the audio. And like same, I have seen on Twitter from a while back even people doing even before AI, people doing mock-ups of like these old like 80s cyberpunky cars updated to look modern for like I was hoping it'd be the 2020s, but maybe it's the 2030s, 2040s
Mhm,
era of cars where they're like, oh, my bad. What people actually wanted was like the old essence with
mhm. Yeah.
new hardware and new features.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I think we
yeah.
are in the misstep era on multiple fronts
I know.
where people are making, and even in movies also, there's like, why are there movies with like, you can't see anything, you can't hear
Yeah,
anything? It's like,
that's true.
who are you listening to that told you to do this? And it's like, it's a maybe my most idealistic frame is that it's a palate cleanser era
Yeah.
for when we're like, oh, they're gonna get back to their senses hopefully, or like the people who actually care about story and care about brand and care about style get back in the
Well,
driver's
but
seat.
that's the funny thing though, right? Because Joni Ive is, many would say one of the best designers ever, right? With
Yeah,
like Apple. And this is
that's
the
yeah,
second thing that he's, I guess, quote unquote failed at, right? There was the
yeah,
whole open AI thing. Now
yeah,
there's this Ferrari.
yeah. There's a great thread from I think it was a Simon Saris thread. I think he was talking about Bauhaus design, where he's saying
Mm,
that it looks gorgeous at the small scales, like with like watches or with like these little
mhm.
trinket, intricate
Yeah,
small
yeah,
things.
yeah.
It looks beautiful. But if you use the same thing at the large scales, like try to do buildings, it looks like soulless and bad. And I
Yeah.
wonder if Johnny has a similar issue where he's really good at the phones and the like this Dieter Ram style like
Yeah.
handheld kind of devices. But when you expand that into the scale of of a car or something else, like it just doesn't quite work in the same way. And like it's like even I'm good at tweeting. I would say that. I think a lot of people will say I'm good at tweeting. And then I think, oh, I'm a good writer. I should write essays. And my essays
Yeah.
are like mediocre. They're like okay, like it's a different skill set. They're both
It's yeah.
words, but like how
Yeah,
you
yeah.
put things together is just it's a
Mhm,
whole
mhm.
different puzzle. And I imagine if you get very successful at doing one particular thing, people will push you to, oh, you must be good at other things. Let's try doing other things. And then you end up being like Jordan playing baseball, I guess, right? You try like you are a peak athlete or something, but like you're
Yeah,
just not
yeah.
gonna you got to play to your strengths. And I think, I mean, I do sympathize. I think it's difficult when you've been doing the same thing for a long time. You want to try something different, and it's
Mhm,
okay to
mhm, mhm.
try. And it may be that a lot of people are going to be misled or like misdirected for a while that happens. But I do believe, so like one of the Ferrari head of designs from like the previous decades, he went to a Chinese company called what is it, Xpeng. And like if you look up the Xpeng P7, it looks like what an electric Ferrari should be, I would say. Like 80% of the way
Yeah.
there. Like it has the sleek
Yeah.
lines, it looks like a sports car. It's got that. I could imagine that like so like for me again I think of my brother's toy car when like a young teenage boy's aspirational cars. I could see a boy having a poster of the Xpeng P7 as something aspirational, like to but like, I wouldn't see the Ferrari lose. And it's such a simple test, right? It's such a simple test that I wonder if the people in the room having discussions about it, right, like find it almost insultingly simple to think of it that way. Like, it's like same for like I remember this is a very random thing, but I remember when like before Biden became president, when he was one of the Democratic candidates, and I'm like halfway across the world. I don't know anything about like the precise insider politics, baseball of whatever. But like people, I was betting that Biden would win just because he's the only candidate that my mom knows. Right, as a like, it's just a low info
Yeah, yeah,
voters
yeah.
end up deciding like who gets through. And it's like, yeah, it's like I do think a problem with in marketing in general and in product design and in everything else, it's like people get really, and this is an interesting contrast with what we're talking about with like the Spielberg podcast where you go deep in the weeds. Like
Mhm,
while
mhm.
you do go deep in the weeds, like for your I would guess that for your movie to be good, you can have deep in the weeds details, but you cannot miss like the low resolution, like if someone's squinting and they have
Mm.
to like with very little info and very little context, like if that doesn't get them interested, then like all the deep dive details kind of get wasted because it's like
Mhm.
you don't get to have that first impact, first connection,
Yeah.
um, engagement, right? So it's like you have to do both. And experts tend to make this mistake. Like you take things for granted because you're so good at what you do and you get so into details and you're like, oh, if you see all the context that I have, you would understand why this is a great car. And like people don't have that context day to day.
Yeah, yeah. That's super interesting because I saw mostly negative reactions, but I
Mhm.
did see that people liked the interior,
Yeah,
right?
it's better.
Um,
The interior is better. Yeah,
right.
and
And
I
so
think
it was
people
like
don't. It doesn't. Yeah, so, go on.
so it was like funny to think about. It's just like people are not going to get past the
Mm,
exterior to
yeah,
like the interior, but I could
right,
see, you know, other car companies taking details from the inside of the Ferrari and taking it
right.
for their car because they're like,
Yeah, for
oh,
sure.
people actually like this. They just
Yeah.
don't like how it's dressed up.
The interior looks fine to me. You know,
Yeah.
it's just even, I mean, so even the exterior, if it didn't have the Ferrari logo on it, it's a nice car, and it's just when you put the
It's just
Ferrari
not a
logo on it,
Ferrari.
yeah, it's not a Ferrari. So when you literally, like, I'm looking at the pictures now, and like if you just remove the Ferrari sticker, I'd be like, yeah, it's a pretty cool car. It's just when you put the Ferrari sticker on it, your
Yeah.
brain clashes. There's a dissonance
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
clash in your head between
Yeah, yeah.
let's not.
Yeah. I mean, but I think that's a lesson for marketers, right? There's like
Yes.
there's an idea there that
Mhm.
people have of your brand. And if
Right.
you go outside of that, in a way that doesn't actually show the history,
Mhm.
people are just like, well, this is not, for me. You've changed it too much. I don't like it. And
Right.
you might even lose, people,
Yeah.
because they're just like, oh, that's not, I don't like the direction that the brand is heading. Like, I'm
Right.
good.
Oh man,
And they
there was
might
this
even lose
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what is that cool factor points, right? Where it's
Right,
just like you might even affect sales of your other Ferraris that do look
right.
like Ferraris because now you have this
Yeah,
stain of a weird
yeah.
car, you
I
know?
mean, yeah, exactly. So, literally, so again, I don't have the disposable income to consider my next supercar purchase. But
Yeah, yeah.
like, if I was like I'm kind of equidistant between Ferrari and Lamborghini. I'm like they're both kind of cool
Sure,
car. Like,
yeah, yeah.
but then if Ferrari does a misstep like this, and if let's say
Uh-huh.
Lamborghini's next car is just in line with what they've always been doing, then
Uh-huh.
it seems intuitive that I should go with the people who, because again you're buying the product as an extension to borrow some of their narrative, right? Like to kind of
Mhm.
to share in the story that the product tells. And like
Mhm.
right now, Ferrari's product vision is schizophrenic to the audience. Like you don't know what
Which
maybe
is
it'll pay off.
crazy,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
But
I feel
it
like
does.
it
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I mean, I feel like they're just wanting a change, but
Hmm.
it's just like, how are you gonna expand your customer demo
Yeah.
when, like, now neither customer
Right.
thinks
Yeah.
that you're worth buying or that you're cool? Or,
Yeah.
like, when you're considering the brand, I mean, you
Mhm.
have to take into consideration that history, or if
Right.
not, like, be prepared to lose,
Yeah.
both sets of customers.
Yeah, I again like I tend to look up this class of thing. Again, video games are my passion. So like same thing has played out in video games a bunch where like there are games that are very good at something and then mysteriously the sequel just sucks at all the things that the previous game was good at. And I used
Uh-huh,
to try and
uh-huh.
understand why. Like why
Mhm.
did they ruin the thing that the people who love the game love? It's probably similar the case with Ferrari as well. Like it's if you dig into why these decisions were made, it's like internal politics in the management. Like there's people who like so there would have been some people who said we should do things the old way, and then like the people with increasing amounts of power in the company, it might be the salespeople, it might be the it's just a different group of people. Even there's a Steve Jobs quote about this. He talks about how the product people with the sensibility for what makes a beautiful product that customers love, they have to make the thing first, and then everyone loves it. And then to get more sales, you get like the marketing, and and again, when he's talking about marketing in that context, he's talking about like very, just pushy advertising, like whatever it takes to make number go up. And that means even undercutting, like over promising things, diluting the brand, whatever, like for like quarterly sales maxing, right? Like you may violate the brand. It's a very kill the golden goose kind of dynamic. And then
Mhm.
when those people end up in charge from having, like one good quarter or couple of good quarters, they then feel like they know what they're doing. And from their perspective, it must feel that way. And then they make suggestions that violate the essence of what makes a good product. And the product people like either quit or leave in disgust or get fired from butting heads and not knowing how to play politics or like whatever. And then you're left with people in the company who don't know how the sausage is made, right? And then it just so it happens in every organization. I think it's almost I used to wonder if it was like avoidable, but I've come around to thinking that every company slash product has its day in the sun, and then it overstays its
Mhm.
welcome, and then it's time for the next guys to come along and show how to do it better. So yeah, if,
Yeah.
in my mind, Ferrari has like one more shot to like redeem themselves. Like either their next car has to be like, just kidding. Here's the
Yeah, yeah,
real.
yeah.
Like you get to do one new Coke before you go back to Coke, right?
That's
Otherwise,
funny. Yeah.
it's you do new Coke and then new Coke 2 and Coke is dead, right? That's just my view. So that's how I think it's gonna happen.
That's funny. Well, that's the perfect segue into my next topic, which is
Right.
the YouTube to director pipeline.
Yeah.
Which is basically you're having the new guys kind of come in and take over
Mhm.
Hollywood and the
Right.
box office and
Right.
completely just like turn up the system.
Yeah.
So this year so far, 3 YouTube creators made
Mhm.
their feature film directorial debuts, and
Mhm.
they all bypassed the Hollywood path entirely.
Right.
Kane Parsons built Backrooms, the franchise, from a viral YouTube series that he started at age 16, got A24 to come in, and he just opened at 118 million globally at age 19. He's now A24's youngest director ever and the highest opening weekend for an A24 movie. Markiplier self-financed Iron Lung at 3 million, distributed it himself and grossed 51 million. And then Curry Barker directed Obsession, which also has been breaking records. And in every, case here, what I've found really interesting is that they all built up an audience for themselves on YouTube and or TikTok before a studio ever got involved. And so basically kind of what, I want to point out here is that like, not only is it, a way for young people to just kind of speed run how they get into the industry after years of having young directors kind of complain that the traditional film industry runs too much on permission. You have to go to film school, get industry relationships, build up that festival circuit, then get a development deal, and then maybe eventually you direct something. These creators have skipped all that by just
Yeah.
building up an audience,
Yeah.
creating their films, coming up with ideas, getting that financed, and then, coming out, basically, killing all box office numbers. And essentially like de-risking themselves by bringing their audience with them. So all these studios are basically just have an easier decision to make because they're like, well, you've already, built up your audience, right? We're seeing that as well in like the publishing world where like
Yeah.
more and more like, the big publishers want authors to come to them with like their own audience that they've built up on social media, email lists, in order for them to know that like, hey, we have like a steady audience to promote our book to. So it doesn't surprise me that this is happening
Yeah.
for YouTube. I also saw recently they did one of those like Hollywood roundtables where Rachel Sennott is talking about how she basically got plucked from Twitter, where she built up an audience and like became known as like a writer, and was able to use that to then catapult into like doing movies, and now her own show. And you were talking about this earlier, right? It was like you built up your Twitter audience, and then you were
Yeah.
able to kind of parlay that into like your next thing. Now it's like, okay, we have like native digital creators that are building up their skills by being able to create video content, and using that to then translate into what people expect on TV. So I think that's like something that we kind of need to be keeping an eye out for, as like people that are joining the industry. It's like figuring out like what are these new skills that you can be using to then parlay into something bigger, or like where you want to head, is one thing. And then just realizing like what a skill it is, like I think overall for like anybody, to be developing these like video skills, where it's like how do you get that hook to bring people in like from the start. Obviously like TikTok and YouTube, like that's all like they focus on, right, is like those first 3 seconds of like how do you get people to like care about like what you're doing. So I think it's remarkable that like we now have 3 examples of like young people, young men, making their way into,
Uh-huh.
having movies. Have you seen any of these movies? Like, would love to know your thoughts about like, creator to director, pipeline.
Yeah, so I haven't seen these movies in particular yet, but like I love to see that it's happening, right?
Hmm.
I think I saw some of Markiplier's thing, but I didn't. It's on YouTube as well, I think, and
Hmm.
oh, I can't remember. But like, I love to see the overall phenomenon, and like I think the
Hmm.
important thing is like this cannot be a thing that turns back. Like we are at the start
Yeah.
of a thing that's just gonna keep going more and more. Because again, like people who don't think about who have not considered the economics of filmmaking at the large scales, like it's a big investment to want to make a
Hmm.
large like a big film, right? And like it, there's so much risk involved, and being able to de-risk it by essentially guaranteeing butts and seats, right,
Hmm.
is it just completely changes the equation. And so it really just it's almost like the apple pie the blueberry pie thing again, where when you don't know what pies people want, you have to get the most benign, inoffensive, like cliche thing that everyone will kind of go see because it's a famous actor and it's a straightforward story, and everyone, it's high production, blah blah blah, but it's it's not gonna take very big risks, so it's all sequels and blah blah blah. And you could say that, okay, something like Backrooms, for example, it's built off of an organic. It started out as a 4chan thing, and then it just there were like in small indie games exploring it, and it really is like everybody involved in the process of shaping that contributed towards like making it a phenomenon. And same for like 50 Shades of Grey started out as Twilight fan
Right.
fiction, right?
Hmm.
Like so it is all, and like it's kind of like all the people involved in the in between don't get as much credit. Like all these young people who are not, I would say they are not encumbered by older people's uh vision of how things are. And here I always love
Hmm.
to talk about Jimi Hendrix. The electric guitar was basically invented in 1940 something, 45, 46. Like he was born around the same time as the instrument, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
instrument didn't come of age until he did.
Yeah.
And hypothetically, you could send someone back in time to do what he did 10, 20 years earlier. And this ties like again with the thing we're talking all the way at the beginning about podcasts and Spielberg and whatever. Like you need the culture to catch up to the technology, right? And
Hmm.
for the culture to catch up, it typically happens with people who were born later, so that they don't inherit the previous assumptions about how you're supposed to do things. So like there are all these assumptions that we have about how cinema is supposed to be, but the like implications and second order effects and all those things, they are to follow through on this, on how those things shake out, and then to go ahead of it and to make movies or to make whatever it is that you make understanding how the culture changes because of it. That's not easy to do. It might be like conceptually easy in hindsight, but it does involve taking a risk that most people don't have the guts to do, you know. Or you might say the naivety or whatever it is, the prerequisites that make someone say, I'm going to make a backrooms movie, right? Like lots of people have done it, but like you have to kind of be in the right place at the right time and you kind of have to throw yourself behind it. Now that people have seen it, again, it's like once one guy ran the 4 minute mile, like a dozen guys ran the 4 minute mile. Right? Now we're gonna have a wave of imitators trying to do similar things, and then there will be like a dumb money throwing cash at the this is gonna be the next back rooms, and then it's not, right? It's probably gonna be some of that. But the underlying spirit of the thing, you already said this, you can develop audiences without major, like before you make your major film or your major documentary or whatever big thing you want to do, you can build an audience with lots of small things and you get alignment on what they're interested in, and then you can get their buy it. It's almost like getting pre-orders in a way, right? Like you get people to buy into an interesting project that might not be apple pie, right? And so I imagine we're going to see a lot more variety. I want to believe, you know, like maybe there's some other constraint that's going to emerge. Like you do get an explosion of diversity in lots of differences, but there's also a centralizing effect that happens that I think the optimists who are at the frontier of the technology, they tend to be like different deviant weirdos who want to see other weirdos flourish. But like every YouTube produces its corresponding Mr. Beast. Somebody is going to figure out like what people want that is, you know, slop. I often use the analogy of Times Square and New York. So much complexity in New York. There's so much, anything you want to find, you can find. But New York also has Times Square, and like it will always have Times Square because that's just where the tourists go. Is a Shelling point for the most garish. I enjoyed going to Times Square once. You know, it's like a just wow, holy crap! It's like this incredible aesthetic overwhelm experience. And like I think similarly, you know, again, when you have podcasts, you're going to have Joe Rogan, which is I don't think that's a bad thing. I think and again, you can always go looking for any obscure esoteric thing you want. One of my favorite YouTube channels is like I think the Sacramento History Museum. They have like this old guy who's a volunteer who makes newspapers the same way it was made like 100+ years ago. It's fascinating to watch, and like anybody can do that. And what a lot of people do is they spend their time like in the beginner zone where, okay, first you go to what's most popular, and then if you don't like it, you complain about what's most popular, and then you're just kind of stuck in that very 101 cycle of consuming and complaining about the main thing the most hyper visible thing that you don't like. But if you actually go looking for what you like, there's now infinite amounts of that, and you can find anything.
So a couple lessons here. So something that this reminds me of, both Steven Spielberg and J.J. Abrams, like getting really into the cameras of their time
Yes.
and learning through that craft to become like the best at what they were doing. And so like it feels like this is that new generation of like, you know, creating things for YouTube and like what audiences want. And it's less about the camera necessarily, but like
Right.
how you're kind of filming what you're doing. And I think we're going to see so much more of this now that, you know, so many more films can be filmed on like Apple phones, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like you can just do it more like handheld. Like when you think about the how movies changed when like, you know, cameras went from being like they're down on the ground to like being able to be handheld, and now it's like we're seeing, you know, this change of like you're able to like go more in depth because like you have the iPhone. And I think like now that we have these tools, are like what are these tools that you can be using to like the best of your ability and like learning new skills that take you in the direction that you want to go to, right? This is especially true for like younger you know, younger marketers. And like, I mean, anybody that wants to learn, right? Like one of the interesting conversations that I had last year was with one of the like producers that worked with the Spurs, like how they would create like video content while being like courtside trying to like film, you know, all the plays being done. And I feel like now that like us as audience members are more used to seeing, you know, things like on mobile or like portrait mode, there's this new way of creating like movies that like fit that medium that like wasn't possible before. And I feel like all three of these movies have used that to their advantage to kind of show like, hey, we are of this like art and like know this medium, and like the people that are going to see this movie most is that younger demographic that's used to this a little bit more. So like being able to create art for like the people of your generation is like an avenue for young people to like really go and like not only just assert themselves but like separate themselves from like everybody else who like is doing things the proper way, going to like film school and doing it the old school way. So I think there's just so much opportunity here to like go into these mediums and like learn how to like do something. I do think though that you're also right where it's like we may also get into the territory of like people are just copying other people instead of coming up with like the
Yeah.
taking the ideas and run with it, right? Like, all three of these, I don't know about the Markiplier one, but at least Obsession, right? Like that's based off the monkey pie idea, and then Backrooms is based off of like that 4chan and like Reddit idea. Um, but at least they went and created like a new story and like in a new medium that isn't just like on YouTube, so I think like a lesson there is like, you can take, ideas, but then how do you remix them or expand them to like create a, bigger like piece of art that like didn't exist before you came to it.
Yeah. When someone creatively violates an assumption like that we didn't know we had, like we all sit up and go, whoa, like that's
Hmm.
different. I don't know if there's a simple way to do it. This brings us into like just general creativity territory where you have to be experimenting and um doing silly things. I think is
Hmm.
is is, is helpful. Like yeah, I think when you get hung up on, oh, I got to do these like marketing activities, and then it becomes like a chore, and you know itself, you yourself know that you're like fitting this very um strict formula. And I mean, which isn't to say that formula doesn't have its place, right? Like, so like you shouldn't necessarily experiment with the interview format or the conversation format and like confuse every viewer with some new style entirely. I think a lot of people can afford to try more strange things a little bit and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. I was gonna throw in as you were talking that another lesson here is that your audience and building that audience matters so much
Yeah.
now. Like that, it's that having your own channel and like way of
Hmm.
speaking to your audience
Right.
and going direct to them
Hmm.
matters so much more because it's like if you are creating this type of content,
Hmm.
it's easier to go direct to them and like put
Right.
it in front of them than like
Right.
trying to go through different distribution channels. Okay,
Yeah.
we can move on to your last topic.
Yeah, so there's a Twitter account called Cultural Tutor. It started out as this guy just tweeting about architecture and history and contrasting it with like contemporary. Why are lampposts so boring and ugly today when there used to be beautiful ornate lampposts in the past?
Yeah.
And it is an interesting question. And there had, I think, similar to Backrooms in a way, right? Like it's a trend that's been spreading. I don't know if you want to say quietly or not so quietly, but like people have been frustrated with like the general ugliness and disrepair and not even disrepair, right? It's just
I guess the
blandness of
millennial grayish and like the
yeah,
flipping of houses and like
right.
yeah, it's a whole
Yeah.
design aesthetic that's super
So
boring for sure.
people have been complaining about it for some time. And Cultural Tutor, he made one YouTube video which is like I think 20 minutes long. It's set in London, and it's a very beautifully composed video with very nice like classical-ish music. And I think the title of the video is "Why is Modernity So Ugly?" A 20-minute video walking around London showing beautiful things and ugly things. And that got like I think like a couple, almost maybe by now it might be 200,000 subscribers, or like more than
Mhm.
100,000 subscribers. And they are pitching to make a TV show called The Modern World, where they have a plan where like for the first season they might do maybe Europe, and then if it goes well they might do other parts of the world. And the pitch, I love the way they framed it. He said it's like doing Planet Earth, the David Attenborough nature show, right? And so that kind of format. So that itself is a great pitch. I remember in Made to Stick, the book, they talk about how Alien, the movie, was pitched as Jaws in space, and it's kind of the Uber for X
Yeah,
formula,
yeah,
which
yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
But if you have a evocative concept and then you frame it
Yeah.
as simply as that. We take this thing and we do it for this thing well. It's a very generative metaphor. Everybody involved, professionals especially, they can make the translations in their heads, and it's very easy to know, okay, what kind of music should we use? What kind of how closely or far, like what's the pacing should be like, and then all those small thousands of small decisions become easier to make because you know what you have in mind. You can go on Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever. There's like tons and tons of nature documentaries, but there hasn't really been one like what they're proposing. Millions of people complain, right, about how ugly things are, but like it takes some vision and some commitment to be like, okay, there's a there.
This whole episode has seemed to be about that, right? It's like these new
Yeah.
mediums, right? Where it's like YouTube, podcasts, the fact that like it's not just that these folks are super interested in this topic and like want to do it, but the fact that their audience or the
Mhm.
target audience is
Right.
expecting that type of content and then
Yeah.
also is searching for it, right? Where it's
Right.
like, oh
Yeah.
yes, I actually do want to learn why we no longer built Art Deco buildings, right? And now
Yeah.
everything is just glass or,
Yeah.
the horrible like prison looking ones, right? Where it's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
and especially like in cities like I'm in LA, right? Where it's like we're constantly trying to have conversations of like, we need to build more housing. Well, why is all housing ugly? And it's like everything looks like it's a prison, or there's like, there was a dorm that they're trying to build here in LA. I forget if it's going forward or not. That was gonna have no windows for like the people living in the rooms. Yeah. And it's like,
Yikes.
what is happening? Where it's like, I guess we're trying to optimize for building as many rooms as possible, but you also don't want people to be depressed because there's no light coming
Yeah.
into their room, right?
Right.
Or, the whole single stair thing, right? Where it's like everything has to be built with like an elevator that's a certain
Right.
size. So we
Yeah.
can't build things as much,
Yeah.
why can't we build Victorian houses anymore? Or like, like some of the architecture in LA is just so gorgeous here, right? So we have, homes from like the 1960s, right? Like those beach houses or like, Spanish villa type houses. There's just so many nice houses that were built like, up until like the
Okay.
90s. And then all of a sudden everything's like a Mac mansion, I think two things from this, right? It's like, there is what you were saying, this like feeling in the air that things are getting ugly. And then also like, that someone cares enough to actually
Yeah.
create this content, and I think, going back to our earlier topic with like the podcast and like the YouTube channels, it's like, it's okay to like nerd out on like specific like niche topics, as long as you care about them, because I think that's what comes across. Like people just want to like hear from people that genuinely care or like genuinely like a specific topic, and like hear from them instead of, I went to like their website and they're like, a lot of like history documentaries are just so boring, right? Or they're like not even
Yeah.
real. They're not filmed with like, you're not filming the actual like the buildings, right? It's like you're
Right.
doing B-roll, right? Or you're
Yeah.
doing like stock footage, right?
Right.
And it's like one of the taglines was like they want to do what the Planet Earth documentaries did for like Earth and show you buildings instead, where it's like,
Right.
oh, we'll show you the actual buildings, what they look like from, the outside and inside. So I thought that was like a really, interesting way to kind of, for this generation that expects better high quality, content creation of like documentary type, films, that like, let's do that for this thing that like we actually care about. And I think, I think it has like a possibility to be like very successful, because
Yeah.
it's one of those things, we do like seeing visual things. I think that's a huge reason why video podcasts are doing so well. It's like people actually want to watch, people talk instead of just like, audio type stuff, especially for, something as visual as this. I also
Yeah.
want to give it a shout out because they did raise money from Tyler Cowen and Patrick
Nice.
Collison of Stripe. So
Nice.
it's like a legit project that's getting bankrolled. So it'll be interesting to kind of, see where they take it.
Yeah, and like you can see the comments from people who don't have any context about because I think it went viral on YouTube, like in the algorithm on YouTube. So
Hmm.
there are people who watched it who have no connection with like the cultural tutor on Twitter, for example, and so like they don't know the background of how it was made. There's comments that's like, wow, this guy showed up, made one great video, and then bounced like 7 months ago, and it's which is like, it must be so validating, I think, as a creator when your stuff reaches people that are not in your original audience. So you have this
Mhm.
original audience that gestates this idea with you, and then
Mhm.
they probably bought in part because of their relationship with you and they like
Mhm.
you and
Mhm.
whatever. And then if your idea kind of like then goes out into the world and connects with people who don't know you and they love it,
Mhm.
that's you know that you've really tapped into something like
Right.
universal there and it's gonna do well. So I would bet on this show doing well. I think it's an idea that time has come, and like the
Mhm.
people involved in it seem to be doing a good enough job that it's gonna, like, again, yeah, I would make a pretty sizable bet on this, and I hope to see it flourish. And again, it's like even that doing well, I think is will show people who might not even be might be making other classes of things, but it's just more and more confirmation that this kind of model of making stuff
Mhm.
works, like getting attention, getting funding, getting all of
Mhm.
these things. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Cool. So that leads us into takeaways for the whole episode. I think,
Mhm.
as I was just saying, we've kind of coalesced around this whole idea that like, um, using these new like channels, YouTube, podcasts, TikTok is like a great way to get in front of people that actually care about like a
Mhm.
niche topic. And I think it's even better for like folks to nerd out. And one other thing that was reminding me that I didn't say earlier was that like I think it's a way for like celebrities, as we were talking here, but also if you kind of take your your founders and like try to build like thought leadership around them, it's a better way to create more authentic content because you can show that they actually care about what they're building or what they're, doing in a way that is not possible with a lot of other types of content. So like try to really find those like unique niches that like you're interested in and that like you can find some possible audience for, and then try it with like video content because that really seems to be like where things are headed. Video
Yeah.
podcasts are like growing in popularity. These like YouTube channels that like are getting created, and as we're seeing, right, like Netflix is looking for that type of content, right? There's a reason why they bought, or they didn't buy, but they're partnering with The Ringer to bring, and they basically created, changed over all their like podcasts into video podcasts so that they can start being featured on
Mhm.
Netflix. So that I think like that's kind of like the future of like we're just gonna have content be created in that way, more video content. So go out and create those ideas.
Yeah, it's gonna be funny if, and I'm a person who loves books and writing. That's my original love. But it'll be funny. I wouldn't be surprised if, again, if you look at human history, for most of human culture, most of human history, human culture was an oral culture where people talk face to face, and so there's all this information in your voice, in your facial language, body language that is essential to communication, and we kind of stripped it out for text, where which was like, you could say it's a kind of, again, it's like when if you read a lot and you type a lot and you're used to working with words, you forget how abnormal that is. Actually, it's like encoding information into symbols for other people to decode. And video was very expensive to make for a long time, and now it's not. And I do think we still haven't, like, so for, I guess, for the kids, for Zoomers and alphas and like 2000 post YouTube generations and TikTok generations, I think they get this quite easily. But I think older people, so again, like outside of filmmaking, like people who our age and older, and I think even me, as someone who's like who kind of works in media ish, right? Like I continue to underestimate how easy it is to make video and to upload video. And like if I'm like that, I'm sure like all my peers in outside of media are like that, where we just continue to underestimate video because it just seems inaccessible long after it has already become accessible, and it's just going to keep getting more and more accessible, right? Like I'm sure, I don't know if the tech is great for it yet. I bet like some semblance of it exists where you can upload a video and then the thing will do the snippets for you. I think that's going to happen if it hasn't. I think there are already
Yeah,
tools
there's a
trying,
couple, so
right?
far, but it's just not
It's,
very, sophisticated yet.
Yeah, it's only
So,
going to get more
yeah.
sophisticated. So eventually, you won't even have to clip your stuff yourself. I'm pretty sure. Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it might
yeah,
be
for
like
sure.
next year or the year after. Like, so
Yeah.
you just record a long ass conversation with anyone, and then it
Uh-huh.
will send you back the best parts or the most interesting parts. Like, how cool is that? It's amazing.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me, Visa.
It
Where
was
can
fun.
people find you?
So Twitter is best, I guess, x.com/Visakanvi. Or I do have a YouTube channel, also Visakanvi.
Mhm.
And I'm mostly trying to do Substack essays these days, which is again visakanvi.substack.com. So just Google Visakanvi and choose whatever medium you like and yeah, let's get in touch, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And then you can follow me at Sonia Bushes everywhere, and then follow the podcast at Minty Pod on YouTube, Spotify, and TikTok. See you next week. Bye.